Hello there, welcome to today's video. Today we're going into r/nosleep to read the story, I Used to Love Halloween for Its Candy, Until I Found One Strange Place. Written by Maleficent Bag 1082. Remember to like, subscribe, and check me out in the description below and leave a comment. Now let's get started. When I was a kid, my favorite holiday was Halloween. It was a day I looked forward to all year round. Unlike most kids that anticipated gifts during Christmas, all I could ever think about was the candy. To me, it was something wondrous to be able to walk to a stranger's house and ask for a treat. The scary costumes were just a bonus. Dressing up like my favorite superhero each year left me feeling deserving of such a delicious sweet. For the most part, that wonderment didn't change. Each year I would gather with my friends and scour the streets for as much candy as our Halloween containers could hold. Usually my friends would get tired before me, which I didn't mind. In fact, I figured I was better off without them. More candy for me after all. I would hit a few more houses before deciding to head home. But this one particular night, I felt a bit more determined. I told myself that if I could just get a few more pieces, that I'd be set for the rest of the year. The idea of eating the gluttonous treats for months practically made my mouth water. So I did something I had never done before, and that was, I left my usual neighborhood and visited the houses on the outskirts of town. I imagined unearthing a chest full of undiscovered houses, as if I were some kind of 18th century explorer, searching for new corners of the earth. My parents always told me to stay close to home, that the people that lived outside our neighborhood were different, that they didn't celebrate Halloween like we did. At the time, I didn't give it much thought. I just figured my parents were over-exaggerating, so I ventured out into the darkened roads that seemed to be desolated of any trick-or-treaters, leaving me with the idea that there had to be some more delicious unseen treasures, all waiting for me to uncover them. I must have walked for about 10 minutes before seeing a house. At first glance, I thought my parents were right. From what I saw, the lights were off to the crumbling house. No decorations of any kind lay in the front yard. It was clear this house had no candy, and for the most part this house seemed to be abandoned. I decided to walk a bit further, hoping to find at least one house that was giving out candy. At this point, my mind was no longer enthralled with trick-or-treating. Instead, it was enchanted with the premise of being able to tell my classmates that I alone ventured into the unknown, and having one treat would be the evidence that I needed to demonstrate my courage. As I continued my search, the air became heavy. A slight fog skewed my vision, while the full menacing moon became my one guiding light as I turned corners through the empty dirt roads. My once excitement casually morphed into trepidation as the sounds of the night inundated the lonely space. My heart throbbed with intensity as I finally gave up my excursion and just wanted to go home. Wishing I had heeded my parents' words, my eyes filled with tears as my fear became overwhelming, and I felt like falling over in defeat, there in the middle of nowhere, while weeping until daylight. That's when I finally saw a dim light in the distance. Its dancing glow left me with only one answer. Something that I recognized all too well being a Halloween enthusiast. It was from a candle. I slowly treaded closer, following the burning flame as if it were my salvation. thinking the light would scare away the imaginary monsters that plagued my thoughts. I could hear the howls and hisses from the night critters that surrounded me, only strengthened the closer I got to the burning light. My eyes fixated on Providence, and as I finally arrived, I saw the light was coming from a pumpkin that lay in the middle of a yard in front of a decaying home. A hideous sight it was, the mouth outstretched in different angles across the face of the withering pumpkin as its triangular carved eyes displayed absolute malice. The monstrosity was one of the largest pumpkins I've ever seen. Its height alone must have reached my eye level. At this point, I wasn't too sure if the desolated night scared me more than the sinister beast that seemed to be smiling at me. I pondered if I should just run home or lay still in the hopes the pumpkin wouldn't magically come to life as I slept. Looking back at the path that I came from, all I could see was pure darkness, a never-ending void that journeyed to the deepest realms of emptiness. But looking forward, I saw hope in the flickering candle that lay still in the gaping mouth of the beast. I decided to curl up next to the ghastly creation, as the continued howls from the night sky simmered around me, and soon the sound of the gushing winds became a bit therapeutic. It cradled my mind into ease as my eyes seemed to be closing. I felt the land of slumber calling out to me, and for that moment I felt comforted. Though that comfort would soon be interrupted as the whipping sound of wind became a bit more insidious and a faint growl mixed into the melancholy music that had been created. My eyes quickly shot open as I stood to my feet, looking around for the source of the noise. But it was just more darkness. I grasped at the faint growl, becoming more evident. Whatever was creating the horrid sound was approaching. The wet sound of gurgling fluttered in the air as my eyes bounced from corner to corner to catch the beast in mid-step, preparing myself to run. Finally, the abandoned home that lay in ruins sprung to life as the front door creaked open, and to my horror, that sound only became more and more vivid. It, in fact, was coming from some devilish entity. The demon shouted out. A gray hand gripped the side of the door as it opened. I froze in place from terror, not knowing what options did I really have. Scream, perhaps? Who would even hear me? So instead, I stood in place, thinking perhaps I wouldn't be visible to the beast at the angle I was standing. I did my best to steady my trembling body as I held the giant pumpkin even tighter. After several seconds, the long, pale body of the monster finally was visible. Its eyes seemed to glow in the dark, while piles of drool fell to the floor from its frothing mouth. I shut my eyes tightly, pretending to fade away into the midnight sky, like a drifting spirit returning to the afterlife to which it belonged, and counted backwards in my head, trying to occupy my thoughts to ease the grinding of my teeth, knowing the monster would only hear me. That's when I could make out what the devil was saying. It was calling out for candy. The beast wanted candy. I could only hear the creature was sniffing the air. its noise making the most grotesque sound as it hunted for its treat. I lowered my arm from the withering pumpkin's face and grasped at my bag of candy. The thing was smelling my treats. I stared at the pumpkin's face for several seconds as the revelation of my escape had finally manifested itself in my young mind. I was going to throw my bag as far as I could and then run, hoping the beast only was really looking for candy. I breathed in with ambition as I exhaled all of my anxiety, and by some divine miracle, I gathered up the courage to put my plan into action. My small hands clenched the bag tightly as I could, and threw it in the opposite direction, where it chased after the noise, or perhaps the scent, as the thing became a mere blur from its quickness. And soon all I could hear were the breaking of branches as the beast ran to the abyss. I ran into the abyss that engulfed me, hoping I didn't crash into anything. I scurried through the tree line, doing my best to navigate through the thick fog. I could still hear terrific sounds of grunts as I cried, thinking how could the beast still be following me? I must have ran for what felt like an hour. I didn't know what to do. I could hardly see anything. I was tired and scared. I didn't hear the monster anymore, as my breathing calmed, and with that I took the opportunity to rest only to fall asleep. I awoke to the sun blaring down its light onto my face. I stood to my feet, looking around for anything that seemed familiar. The fog had dissipated, and the menacing trees from the night before looked a lot more lush and welcoming. I walked for a few yards and quickly came to the same house from last night, though in the darkness it was hard to make out all its dismantled features, but I was sure it was the same house. I thought I ran far away from it, only to realize I must have been running in circles, or maybe the home itself playing with me like a cat tracking each step a mouse makes before it captures it in its deadly claws. Though now in the daylight, the abandoned house seemed less horrifying and more pathetic. I could see the door was still ajar at the same position the monster had left it. I started to step away backwards, thinking the beast might be close, but then realized the giant pumpkin from last night was gone. Its inundating presence now was a mere memory. I scratched at my head of how that could be possible, and I started to convince myself the whole ordeal was a dreadful nightmare I must have had. I walked around the yard looking for any traces of evidence, and soon I stumbled upon the bag of candy I threw. It looked like it was rifled through. Pieces of candy laid in disarray, but that could have been due to the impact from me tossing it. I then walked towards the horrid home and stepped onto the porch, searching for something, anything, to prove what I saw was real. On the porch, I saw shredded wrappings from candy bars, scattered across the porch, leading into the darkness of the home. The one bar was left unopened, and I bent over to pick up the small candy. The candy bar was a brand that I've never seen before. In fact, the wrapper had no logo, no visible details or writing, no indication of the company that produced it, or any nutritional data. It was just a brown wrapper that protected the mysterious chocolate. I then raised my head and looked inside of the empty house and considered the idea of venturing in. But the thoughts of the possible evil that resided within crushed the idea immediately, and instead I retreated off the porch, placing the candy into my pocket. After that, I walked for a few hours and eventually made it back to the main road. A passing motorist found me and took me back to my neighborhood, where by this point my entire city was out in search of my whereabouts. My parents were completely devastated but relieved when they saw that I was okay, showering me in what seemed to be endless affection. I told my story to several of my friends, but as one could guess, they didn't believe me. No one ever did. I had the chocolate bar as evidence, but always felt reserved at showing anyone. Perhaps what had happened to me needed to die with that horrific night. As time passed, I hated Halloween, but even more so at once my sweet tooth vanished. I didn't participate in any of the festivities when it came to the spooky holiday. Instead, I became the lonely weirdo that lived on the outskirts of town. I became a bit of a legend, the scary old man that eats children during Halloween. The story makes me laugh, but it doesn't bother me. I just keep to myself. That was until this October. I noticed people are acting strange. They're not acting like themselves. More terrifying is that I've been finding those same brown wrappers around town. The mysterious candy nowhere to be seen, but even more dire was this year's Halloween decoration at our city hall. The front yard of the building is a giant withering pumpkin, its devilish smile sheltering a small candle. I think it's time for me to leave town. Or perhaps it's time for me to get back into the spirit of Halloween and save my community.